Welcome everybody to what we've labelled as Parenting with ADHD, a 101 with learning from world-class coaches. Now, there's only one world-class coach here, and that's not me. But for those of you who know ADHD 360 and know myself, I'm Phil Anderton, and I am joined and honoured to be joined by and with Elaine Taylor-Klaus this evening. Elaine and I go back a long way in the world of ADHD. We first met at a conference by an organisation called CHAD. And I think that must be many years ago, Elaine. And there was a meeting of minds and a lot of fun and a lot of laughter in the conversation. What was your recollection of us first meeting? And be polite.
Yeah, when I first met you, you are extremely tall relative to me. So that's always been an entertaining frickin' frat kind of a dynamic we've got going on. And at the time you were still, I believe, like you were training police officers. Yeah. And so there was this novelty to, he's doing something really interesting and preventive. And so you and I were both in this place of bringing very new, novel approaches to management of ADHD. And I think that's where we clicked.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I was still a policeman then. And of course, as our working relationship went on, a few years ago, not that many years ago, you asked me to review your latest publication before it came to print, if you remember. And that was an honour and a delight. So let's frame you, let's reference you, Elaine. What would you describe? I can see the descriptions from other people. What would you describe as your specialist area for ADHD?
My specialist area. I think there are two answers to that question. One is that from my own personal expertise as a writer, a speaker, a thinker, I translate the complexity of the medical conditions like ADHD, autism, anxiety, neurodiversity into language that everyday humans can understand. And so I think that's probably my gift in this arena, is that I can have very complex conversations with brilliant, doctors or researchers or whatever, and then I can make it make sense to everyday parents and even to everyday providers. And so what I try to do is demystify neurodiversity and help adults get their head around what it really means to live with, support, and parent people with neurodiversity, whether we're parenting ourselves as adults or parenting our kids or whatever combination that is, but to really understand it and to take away the shame and the stigma and the judgment so that we can just learn to be with it and really allow ourselves to reach and allow our kids to reach their extraordinary potential. But you got to do that, you got to let go of some stuff. And so I do a lot of work around letting go of the stuff that's getting in the way so that we can really embrace the magic of what we've got.
Yeah, brilliant. And we'll look at judgment as we go through the hour if we can, because I know I've read some of your work on judgment, and I think that psychological perspective that you bring is really important. And I've been in London today training an organisation of management consultants on understanding ADHD in the workplace. And after about 30 minutes, a senior guy, a director for that organisation, declared that his son of 17 years had ADHD and what a struggle it was. And that shifted the lens on the meeting. And I'm mindful of something I read of yours a while back, where you talked about being a mom of children with ADHD and how miserable the first 10 years of that were. And I'm pretty certain the challenges of being a parent to a child with ADHD will have motivated a number of people to have joined this meeting this evening. And you had an epiphany. You've had many, I know your big learning continues, and we talk about that excitedly with energy all the time.
Yeah.
What was it for you that in the epiphany that becomes a transferable, coachable a moment for you that you share with parents regularly?
You know, as you say, there were a lot of epiphanies along the way. A lot of things changed that allowed me to be with my kids differently and ultimately myself differently. Um, One of them was discovering coaching. And so everything I do comes from this world of coaching and a coach approach, because coaching is an empowerment way of being with anything you're dealing with. So that was a piece. But I think to answer that question the way I really want to in this context with everybody here that's listening is to say the biggest shift was to understand that my kids weren't doing it on purpose. And it was only when I started exploring and being in understanding what was going on with them that, I used to joke my kids were diagnosed one by one like dominoes. And at some point, I looked at my husband and I said, he can't be responsible for all of this neurology. And I went and had myself tested and evaluated and diagnosed with both learning and attention issues in my 40s. So I think the two major pivot points were, one, when I really got that they weren't doing it on purpose, that it was not naughty, it was neurological. And the other was when I realized I've been struggling with this all my life, and I don't want my kids and I don't want other people's kids to grow up feeling the way that I felt, not knowing that there was an explanation for some of the things I struggled with, and not understanding that I wasn't really stupid, because that was the narrative in my head. Everybody kept telling me I was smart, and I knew the truth was I really wasn't. I was stupid because I couldn't remember things, because I had, because of the various ways that the learning and attention issues showed up for me, the executive function challenges. I was sure I was pulling the wool over their eyes, and I was really stupid. And I didn't want my kids to grow up like that. And I needed to do a lot of work to change my own framework of myself around that.
It's you introduced two things there. One is, and it's come up in the chat in an early comment, the challenges of being a parent when you have ADHD, into parenting per se, and then of course parenting a child with ADHD without judgment, and the difficulty and challenge of that. And then I guess there's a twofold challenge sometimes, and that's where you're a parent with ADHD who doesn't understand their own ADHD, trying to understand a child with ADHD, and you don't understand their ADHD. And that heady mix of confusion and lack of understanding is your worst case scenario, isn't it?
Well, here's one more compounding factor. Married to a spouse whose ADHD was more intensive than mine. And so even though I had my own ADHD, relatively speaking, I was still the executive function mom in the house. So the expectation that I was going to be able to keep all the pieces together was still there, even though I was dealing with it, he was dealing with it, and all of our kids were dealing with it. And for a long time, none of us knew that.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. And we do find, don't we, that a lot of parents are in relationships with people with ADHD because of that mutuality of just design and purpose and attraction, and a little bit wacky, a little bit out there, a little bit risk taking, a little bit exciting,
Novel.
dynamic, novel, new.
Yeah.
But yeah, and obviously I spent a lot of time with you and David, and it is the most delightful ADHD off to see who can be the most ADHD without anybody trying it. But you've cracked it, you two guys. You've absolutely cracked it, and that's allowed you to become the super coach and the expert that you are. And I know none of those labels will sit comfortably with you, but you have to be called out as an international expert in what you do, because you are. And the high esteem that people hold you in is not by accident. And the parenting program that you've put together to help other people is truly incredible. you've talked about judgment. What's the mainstay of the program that you put together? What do you think is the crux of the matter that breeds success?
The secret to what we do at Impact, I think, is that we took the world of professional coaching and change management from the workplace. And again, we translated it into parent. And so instead of talking about neurological frameworks, we ask questions like, is it naughty or neurological? Or we talk about getting curious, or we break things down and we talk about taking aim. We took very classic foundational coaching concepts and we put them into a model and a framework for parents to use to tackle any challenging situation that they come across. Because I think that what happens with and we're talking about ADHD, but ADHD has a lot of cousins, right? ADHD, anxiety, learning disabilities, autism, whatever you're dealing with in terms of this realm of neurodiversity. These challenges give us a lot of gifts and they make it kind of hard to function in the world that wasn't designed for the way our brains are wired. And what coaching does as a framework, and this modality does, is it says, I'm going to meet you where you are. I'm going to help you understand what you're dealing with, and then guide you on the path to learning to problem solve for yourself to figure out how to deal with you. I could give you 10 strategies and they might work or they might not. And that's what happens in the ADD world a lot, is that people will say, well, here's some strategies. Well, great, if it happens to be a strategy that works for the way that your brain is wired. But if you use that old analogy or metaphor, I could teach you, I could give you a meal, I could feed you some fish. I could teach you to fish. What I want to do is teach you how to plan your own entire fishing trip. So it's not just giving you a few strategies. I want to teach you what I always say about the parents of my community is I want you to have a bring it on kind of attitude. I want to be able to help you handle whatever is coming your way and have the tools in your toolbox to be able to navigate it no matter what happens, because whether it's a meltdown of a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old or an avoidance of an 8-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 24-year-old who's struggling to kickstart their life, it doesn't matter what the challenges are. The toolbox of coaching gives you a framework to pull what you need to navigate whatever you're dealing with. And to me, that's a way more effective long-term strategy, if you will, or toolbox than giving you a solution to a problem. Because if I give you a solution to a problem, the next time something happens, you don't know what to do with it. But if I give you a problem-solving approach, a methodology that you can use, the next time something happens, you'll know how to handle it, how to navigate it, or you'll know that you can figure out how to navigate it.
And your whole approach and the way you tackle things does stand out. And as I was prepping for tonight, and going back to the things we've discussed over time and those things that we've challenged each other on and the things that we've agreed on wholeheartedly and the laughs and fun that we've had, I was minded to look at the reviews of your latest book on Amazon. And I read this review earlier today, and it said that the title of the review was "Nailed It." Elaine has nailed it, frankly, as I expected. She has a pedigree that's unparalleled with ADHD in the family. My massive respect has only been enhanced by the publication of the book. It'll become the go-to text. And then sadly, I recognised that 4 years ago, that was my review of the book. I wondered why it resonated with me. In the book, we talk about raising complex kids, ADHD and anxiety, and more. And of course, there is a complexity that we can't afford to dumb down here, can we? We can't afford to at all trivialize the complexity of what's going on. But I've got, as we start to, and I want to explore that complexity. And you've mentioned the cousins that come with ADHD. One of the words you use as a word of affection for co-occurring conditions. The elephant in the room that I'd like to respect straight away is you're in Georgia, you're in Atlanta, you're American, and there will be within our audience and an extended audience an observation of, does this toolkit cross over the Atlantic? Does it work with English kids? Now, I know the answer to that question. You know the answer to that question, but I'd like you to articulate it and why, because I think it's really important that we understand the transferability of what you teach, for want of a word.
Okay. Interesting, really interesting question. So we have a lot of people in the UK in our community, and I've had many clients, private clients, group clients from the UK, and continue to. And Diane and I have both been there and spoken there. So it translates best to people who speak English because we don't speak any other language. Although it has been translated into Chinese and into Spanish and into Norwegian even. I think that the answer to that question is that what we often say at Impact is the change you want for your kids starts with you. And this is a universal situation, no matter where you are in the world, that as parents, we bring our whole life experience into the dynamic. And we bring how we were parented, and we bring what expectations there were on us and what expectations we have of our kids. And part of the job of parenting and raising adults is to find those ways that we can step out of the way so that we can steward these kids forward on their journey. Because our job isn't to raise them to be what we think they should be. Our job is like the Michelangelo sculptures, the unfinished sculptures, where what he said wasn't that he was creating the sculpture, he would unearth the sculpture from the stone. And our job is to allow these kids to emerge to be the best version of themselves. And very often as parents, to do that, we gotta manage our own stuff, and we gotta get out of the way and figure out how to support them in being who they are. So I don't care where the parent is in the world. This isn't about, we think it's about the school system. We think it's about advocating with the providers. We think it's about the details, the logistics, but so much of what really makes an effective parent in this realm has got nothing to do with what we're doing. It's got so much to do with how we're being in the relationship with and the dynamic with our kids and their complex issues. We have to deal with our own expectations and figure out how to meet them where they are. And that's what our toolbox does. Yes, there's plenty of doing that we can, because you got to do the doing. You got to get them out the door, and you got to get them to school, and you got to get the homework done, and you got to help them through university or through their exams or whatever. And all of that is fair and real. And the context for that is really about who we're being and our mindset and how we're approaching it. And that is a universal challenge of every parent everywhere in the world.
So we accept, therefore, the elephant in the room and the premise that the approach will cross the Atlantic. And of course, I've seen the experience, I've seen and experienced and seen that. We keep coming back to or dodging around complexity and cousins of ADHD. And quite rightly, you draw out anxiety at the start of your book, and front cover reference to anxiety. And one of the things I deal with when I'm talking to people about ADHD, and I'm not the expert anywhere near that you are, but if we get that model wrong, if we get that framework wrong, and the person with ADHD is struggling to understand themselves and why things are impacting the way they are and whatever. I genuinely believe we can very easily breed anxiety in the people we're dealing with, and traditional models bring more anxiety into that young person's life rather than taking it away. And you know, let's just talk about anxiety for a second, because I think experience tells us, whether that's from a medical model, a psychology model, or just life, that anybody who's suffering debilitating anxiety is nowhere near being able to perform to the best of their capability in anything that's going on. How
Yeah.
do you address that anxiety piece in the framework, as it were?
So we could spend hours on this, and it's a profoundly important topic. And I'll pull a couple of threads from it. One is I want to call, you're talking about the elephant in the room, girls and ADHD. Girls are very, very often misdiagnosed with anxiety. I was one of them. A lot of the women we see getting diagnosed now, as they're seeing their kids getting diagnosed, we're beginning to realize they've been treated for anxiety for decades. And so, because girls are raised to please and raised to perform and raised to do good and to be quiet and all of these things, we're trying so hard to get a handle on things that can manifest as anxiety. And so, and then this next piece for any gender, when you can't get yourself to do what the world expects you to do, it's going to make you anxious. So, and over time, if that's not addressed, it's going to make you depressed. So I'm not saying that there is no coexisting anxiety with ADHD, but I am saying that very often undiagnosed, untreated ADHD will lead to anxiety. And that in my own experience, as an N of one, but I have dealt with it with hundreds of clients. When you begin to manage your own ADHD, whether for adults or for children, you're gonna, if the anxiety is being caused by untreated ADHD, you're gonna see it start to lessen significantly. Because part of what's happening with ADHD is, again, we can't get our brains to do what the world expects our brains to do, and often what we expect our brains to do. Why can't I just? It's not just parents saying, why can't they just? It's us saying, why is it so hard for me to? The first article I ever wrote, probably 20 years ago, was, why can't I put myself to bed? Why was it so hard for me as an adult to get myself to go to sleep when I knew I needed to get enough sleep? And that started really, really young. And so if I can't get myself to do what I think I should be able to do, that it starts getting stressful, because my brain feels out of control. And that's anxiety producing. Right?
Yeah.
So, and yes, there are all sorts of other things that are going on. I was just watching some research about the shift that's happening in kids born after 1995. And that first decade or so of kids after that age, we're kind of in the internet age. We're kind of dealing with some typical stresses. We had 9/11, which added this, what I think is kind of a worldwide PTSD or trauma impact. And then in 2010, with the advent of the cell phone, we have this whole different relationship between mental health and what's happening with kids. So there are external factors at play as well that we can't deny. We're seeing this uptick in all of this mental health stuff. And I don't mean to say stuff as if it's not important. And it's happening correlated to all of these things that are happening at the globalization of the world. And I don't think we can disconnect them. We as humans are having a hard time processing what's happening, processing and dealing with all the information that's available to us and all the expectations on us. And I don't think that's an argument for not progressing, but I do think it's an argument for being conscious about how we choose to handle those expectations, and recognizing when it becomes an assault to the nervous system, and we have to make choices for ourselves to kind of down regulate and allow ourselves to continue to process. I was just interviewing somebody for my podcast who was talking about the different specific things that happen in the ADHD brain that have to do with reducing the ADHD brain's capacity to navigate the sensory stimulation, and the ways that the ADHD brain remembers the negative stimulus more than the positive stimulus. So there's a lot of other factors that come into play that compound our relationship with some of these other coexisting conditions.
Absolutely. And again, you've referenced so much that I can't possibly pick it all up to segue into the next subject. You and I both work a lot and have a huge amount of respect for Tom Brown and Tom's work. The man is an absolute legend, and Tom has this way of dumbing things down at times and getting us all to understand understand things. And he talks about erectile dysfunction of the mind, when you just
Yes, I
can't
love
get it
that.
up and you can't get things going and you can't start. And you know, if we just change the lens for a second, the frustration of a parent trying to get their child to study or to revise or to do homework, and the absolute torture for an ADHD child sometimes to start that work off, and the friction that causes within the home life and the family. And again, if I come back to it, shouting at the child is only going to produce anxiety. Falling out with the child is only going to produce more anxiety. And more, so how? Let's just deal with one nuance of a framework for a second. If change starts with us, where's the change in that very common, especially this time of year, that very common exam revision, high pressure scenario for a parent of a teenager going through that? Where does the framework take us when change starts with you?
I love that question because I've supported many, I know I've supported many parents through the cycle where you are in the UK at this moment. The change starts with us. Typically in that environment or in that scenario, I'd say it starts with communication, and that builds on relationship. So very, very often with parents of teenagers, if the relationships are starting to get fractured, if there's starting to be a lot of contentiousness, if there's disconnection happening. And some of that is developmentally appropriate because teenagers are supposed to start disconnecting from their parents. But if it's not happening in a kind of normal, healthy way, but it's in a more reactive way. Somebody said to me the other day that her kid said to her, I just can't stand the sound of your voice, right? Like, there is some research that shows that that's developmentally normal, sadly, but also when relationships are frayed, that's when we guide people to reconnect and rebuild and refocus on the relationship. And I know that sounds hard to do when there's an exam at stake, when there's an urgency, and the important thing about this work is that it happens over time. And sometimes we have to slow down to speed up. And we think that this next thing, this exam, this test, this paper, this is so essential. And we as parents get really, really attached to whatever that outcome is that we're looking for. And you have a merit-based, not a merit-based, a performance-based system that reinforces that panic, that reinforces that anxiety. And we have to be in this for the marathon. As parents, we have to reconnect to, because if we start with the assumption that our kid actually does want to do well, that they will do well if they can, that it's hard for them that they're not doing well, that can give us an access point to get on their team and to support them in the process instead of expecting from them. And I often talk about it in terms of wanting for them more than we want from them. If they feel like we want for them to support them in this, what can I bring you? Can I get you a snack? How can I help? That's a very different place from, I expect you to be studying and you're not doing this. And so then I want from you to perform for me. That's about me. If I want for you, it's about you. And we need to support these kids in their agenda, their ownership of it, particularly in a system like the UK, because it is performance-based and you do have these metrics that they have to hit, and they really do want to, and they're afraid they can't. So if we reinforce their fear that they can't with our fear that they can't, or that they're not doing it right, that's actually going to aggravate their capacity instead of getting on the team with them and supporting them. And that at the fundamental nature, that's about relationship and about how we're communicating with them.
There's a comment in the chat, and I'll read it to you. Absolutely love the chat. Real brings home that we need to give ourselves as parents permission to slow down, and it's okay to slow down. And I called that out amongst one of many chats, because the advocation of it's actually about us, change starts with us, change starts with you, is really easy to say, but of course then the demonstration of that and in the real world with those exam problems, whatever, the articulation of that and the reality of that is very challenging. And for me that segues into your model, if I can, of the 6 challenges that families face with complex kids. And you talk in there about emotions and organisation, schoolwork, relationships, and you do as a human come back to relationships a lot, don't you? You anchor an awful lot of your work and your very being, your soul is anchored in relationships. And I've seen you around your own kids who are all adults now, and I've seen you around David, but I've also seen you around other peers, and you are so anchored in relationships that it's, I find it, Elaine, almost impossible to emulate because you're so damn good at this stuff. What's your secret sauce? What is that element of your being that allows you to coach, to be that person that can make it all about the self, to invoke change for people's benefit?
Thank you for that. First of all, that was a beautiful acknowledgement. 2 things come to mind. One is I am a coach at my core. And so a lot of what you see me being is not coaching from a skill base, but from coaching from a being base. I have done a lot of work over the years where I'm a coach always. And a coach means I'm always about seeing and holding other people's potential and their and having a vision for their capacity. And it also means there's something we teach, we learn in coach training. I think it's also taught in therapeutic realms. It's about listening skills. It's about really being over there, about paying attention to what's going on for someone else and not having it be about me, but having it be about them. And I think the core to how do you be in relationship with someone, and relationships and conversations are dynamic. You're going back and forth. There has to be a back and forth. It can't be all about them. But as humans, we often kind of get lost in making it all about me.
Mm-hmm.
And as parents, we very often get it lost. We think it's about them, but it's really about, what do I think about what you're doing, right? It's, I expect you to. And so really bringing this coach approach that I talk about as a way of being is about being over there, letting the attention be about what's going on with that other human being. And I think this is one of my ADHD superpowers, one of my gifts, is that I can be so attentive to you in conversation with you that it's all about you, and you feel it's all about you. You feel seen, you feel heard, you feel acknowledged, which humans need, every one of us needs. And that's actually hyper focus for me. I watch my kid, one of my kids is an actor, their capacity to be completely present in that moment and not, like, believe it or not distracted by anything, because they are hyper focusing on where they are. That's their gift as an actor. And so I think part of what is coming up from this is a this just in moment for me, is it's turning some of those things that other people see as a deficit and finding the strength in it and applying it in a way that is constructive and useful and not detrimental. I have hyper focus issues that keep me locked in my office when my husband's saying it's time for dinner, right? Like I am no perfect human being, but when I am in a conversation with somebody else, I am fully present, more often than not, fully present to that conversation.
And that can be a challenge for somebody with ADHD. That's not naturally learned behavior, is it? To be able to singularly focus on a conversation with an individual, and that's and the awareness of that, the
It can
power
be
of,
learned, but it
yeah,
can be learned, because I
yeah,
don't think I was always like that. I think I learned by learning listening skills and learning coaching skills. I learned to do that. I learned how to notice the different levels of listening and how to be present with it. It is a learned behavior.
and of course, if you've got an emotionally dysregulated child in their moment, the reaction of, in terms of transactional analysis, a parenting reaction
Mm,
is going to fuel that fire and make things worse. A
yeah.
judgment that, why are you behaving like that, as a snarly question. What I'm hearing, and from everything I've read and the work we've done in the past, if our approach is something's going wrong here, let's work out what's going wrong. Let's try and solve that problem from the perspective of the person that's now emotionally dysregulated. We stand a greater chance of building and keeping that relationship, as opposed to fueling the fire of negativity. Have I got that right?
I think that's right on target. And what I would add is that sometimes as a parent, we need to know when to pivot. And we need to know when the issue is no longer about loading the dishwasher. And now the issue is about helping you manage that you're dysregulated, and how can I help you emotionally learn to calm down when you're dysregulated. And so I have to be willing to let go of the dishwasher or turning off the television, like whatever the direction was at the moment, and realize that once explosion happens, once somebody's is elevated, if you will, we talk about it in terms of aware, alert, and alarm. And I think our kids walk around in this kind of middle state of alert, on high alert, a lot more than we realize. So we think they're going from 0 to 100, but they're really going from about 75 to 100. So it's not a far jump. And so once someone explodes or is dysregulated in that way, we have to stop trying to fix whatever we were trying to fix and start addressing what's happening in that moment right now, which is, you're having a hard time being here right now, and we got to help you regulate first before we can go back to whatever the issue was. One of the things I talk about in the book is the difference between task and relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And as parents, we get stuck on task.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get too stuck on task, we can damage our relationships. Because when a kid or an adult becomes dysregulated, we have to shift to the emotional health first and then get back to the task. That's another aspect of slow down to speed up. Yes, you may have a kid who's going to be late to school for a while until you help them learn how to regulate themselves in the morning. But I would rather you deal with the emotional piece of it and keep them from being re-traumatized by screaming every morning because you're late.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, I remember when my kids, we did a family thing to change mornings in my family. My kids were very much involved with it. And it started with me saying, this morning sucked. Anybody else want to not have a morning like this morning? And everybody's like, yeah, Mom, this was terrible. And they're the ones that came up with the idea of getting up earlier, not me, because I wouldn't have done it because I wanted to sleep. But they're the ones that said, we need time to just putter around in the mornings. And when we shifted the pace,
Yeah.
mornings, and did things like, instead of saying it's 6:52, they knew that at 6:52 Dad was going to come out with a weather report, so they knew how to dress that day. So there were things that we all came up with together that were not blamey, but that allowed us to kind of slow down and move with each other at a pace that worked for them.
I really, what resonated there with me in terms of what you said with aware, alert, alarm. Lisa Mangle, our clinical lead on pharmacology and founder of 360, she calls it the lose it line. And she describes it as the high jump bar. And we all think, if the high jump bar is set at 4 foot, we all think that the person we're dealing with has got the same 4 foot gap from the ground to the bar that we've got. But our ADHD kid, in fact, ADHD adults as well, are running really close to that lose it line, that bar, a lot of the time, and don't have the 4 foot to play with that we would imagine they have. And of course, the child returning from school where they've lived just under that bar because they're good kids and they're trying really hard, and they get home to their safe place, and they go from alert to, and we can tip them into alarm really quickly. If it's sit down and do your homework, pick your blazer up off the floor, and all they want to do is crash out because they've lived so close to that line, breaching that bar for so long, they're exhausted. And you're aware, alert, alarm, and the description of where they live in that bar is an incredible skill for any parents, is to recognize that our kids live so close to that line, and we've got no idea how close they are unless we examine it and we actually work with them to say, right, how was that today? How are you right now? And what can I do for you, to go back to? What can I do for you? Not what do I want from you? Like your meaningless homework or laying the table for dinner. Things that don't really matter, as opposed to the emotional well-being of the child.
Yeah. Well, and two things come up for me, talking about Tom Brown's executive function model. What you're speaking to is emotional regulation. But the other thing you're speaking to is energy management. So it takes a lot of energy for kids to sit all day and manage themselves in school all day. One of my strongest memories, one of my kids, my kid who struggles the most with all of these issues, in 7th grade, every single day I would pick them up from school. It was everything they could do to keep themselves together before the door closed. And then they would break into tears every day of 7th grade. It was so hard. And it wasn't because they were being tortured in 7th grade. It was because the effort it took to manage and regulate their emotions as a middle school kid all day was all they could do. And by the end of it, they were exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't realize how much effort they're putting out just to get up, get out of bed, get dressed, and get out the door. That is, like, for some of them, they've already had a full day. And then we want them to keep going all day and then come home and do more. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot to expect.
It is, and I think that's one of the easier examples of where we shift into your what can I do for you, in terms of we're on red alert, not just a standard alert that coming in from school. And I know Lisa, my colleague, she'll say to a parent, is the homework worth that row? Or could you go back to school and say, we didn't do that homework because it wasn't worth that row, and renegotiate the contract with school as to where right now things are most important? Because if my child were to disengage with school completely, which is what the row will bring, we'll get nothing. We'll get absolutely nothing. And I don't know if you were knocking about Chad in the days of Matt Morgan. Do you remember the wrestler that used to speak at Chad? Huge guy, made me look small and inferior, and I'm 6'5". And Matt used to say he's a tremendous man with ADHD as a professional wrestler. And it was the teacher that let him go out and shoot hoops with a basketball for 10 minutes every hour that saved his school career. And the significance of him burning off some of that difficulty and challenge he was having that allowed him to actually get through school. And for sure, we don't recognise the impact of that constant focus on ADHD kids in the classroom at all, and the difficulties it brings.
Well, and we don't acknowledge what they are doing because we're so busy focusing on what they're not doing, or because they're not meeting whatever expectation or metrics we've placed on them. We're not seeing the effort it takes for them to stay and regulate and manage their impulses and not talk out in class, and all of these things that they're actually doing all day. And we're not giving them proper credit for what they are doing. And we're just on them on top of that. And we don't do it on purpose. And I think this is really important. It's because we don't really understand what they're dealing with. This is why it's so important to slow down and pay attention and understand the way that executive function shows up for your particular kid, because every kid with ADHD is going to be different. That's why we use Tom Brown's model. And we have a chart that we use for parents to go through and with their kid and say, this is where my strengths are and this is where my challenges are, so that we're demystifying why this is hard and acknowledging that it's hard. And then, but it's not an excuse. It's an explanation, because that gives us a way to say, okay, now what are we going to do about it? How are we going to handle this? What are we going to try next? And to take an experimenter's mind, what are we going to try next? That doesn't mean we're going to fix it or solve it or resolve it. It means we're going to learn how to manage it over time. And that's the permission that we need to give ourselves and we need to give our kids.
You've come back to we, not you. And that was subliminal, but it needs calling out, that you're back to what can I do for you, not what are you going to do because you're in the wrong. And that the positivity of the use of language in that scenario is huge, isn't it, as a parenting skill, where we can put incredible distance between us and the relationship, or we can actually embrace and bring forward. And we as an inclusive word is so simple and yet so often missed, in terms of, that's your problem, you've the one who's not done that, you're going to have to fix it, which is a style of parenting that's common and easy to fall into. But how can we fix this together? How can we move on? What's the next thing we can try together? I can feel in your language there an inclusivity of that relationship.
There's, in coaching, we say that words create worlds. And there's a lot of attention placed on words and the words we use. And parents in my community will say, you know, I'm still practicing and I'm learning how to use it's a muscle to practice. It's an exercise. But words really make a difference in how people receive and hear it. I teach a bunch of a series of trainings on communication skills. And we talk about there's 4 aspects to communication. There's what we say, and then there's what we communicate. And then there's what someone hears, and then there's what they receive. And we need to pay attention to both what we say and what we're communicating. And so you can say, take the backpack and hang it up on the wall in a million different ways that can be received in a million different ways. So we really need to be conscious as parents and the intention behind it. If I'm coming from a place of frustration and judgment, they're going to feel it or hear it, or anxiety or overwhelm or fill in the blank. They're going to feel it. They're sponges. If I'm coming from a place of what we call ABI, assume best intention, if I believe your best intention is to be helpful, supportive, respectful, loving, whatever it is, then I'm going to come without judgment. And you're going to experience me differently. Now, yes, there are some language hacks I can teach you. Like, for example, try not to start a sentence with the word you. It puts people on the defensive. Try not to start a sentence with the word why. That puts people on the defensive. Like, yes, there's some language hacks, but there's also the kind of the intention behind it. What you're coming from, the belief structure that you're bringing behind it is going to influence how the language is received.
And I guess you're absolutely right. And I guess what you've also got is what's going on for the recipients of that communication will also determine what they receive as well. So sometimes, if no matter what the ABI is trying to empathize with, if that's not massively landing in the right place and the communication doesn't go well, we've got to work out why quite quickly, haven't we? We've got to pivot on what's gone wrong there and why, and that didn't land. Why didn't it land? What can we do about it? Because we're not always in control of the whole communication piece. We may only at best be in charge of what we're sending. We're not in charge of what the other person's receiving.
It's a really great observation and a recent example, actually. So I have my eldest kid's in their late 20s and has been for a while dealing with some mental health stuff since the pandemic, and is doing the work and getting support and all of that. And they were in town visiting, and something was happening where every time I was saying something, I was noticing they were going on the defensive. And to your point, it really wasn't about what I was saying. They were starting defensive because it turned out they were so angry with themselves for something they had done or hadn't done or had done wrong or whatever. And so at some point I literally called to clean the slate. It's like, can we stop for a minute? Because it feels like there's something else going on. And we were able to have a very difficult but very profoundly important conversation to open the air to find out what they were reading into everything that had nothing to do with what we were saying. But that, I will say, took a lot of work and a lot of years, and like to be able to have that level of conversation, circling back, means you have to have the relationship.
Yeah.
You have to have enough trust to be able to have those kinds of conversations. And we, as parents of kids with ADHD, we fall out of trust with them, and they fall out of trust with us. And part of the reason I put so much emphasis on relationship is because that's the foundation to build the trust that allows us to have the kinds of effective communication we need to have.
Yeah. Well, you talk about trust. I'm just looking at some of the questions here, Elaine, and there's a question here about trust with an ADHD teenager. You're going to love this one, and this could go into another hour, so you're going to have to pull this in from where you want to go. How do I rebuild trust with an ADHD teenager who's repeatedly lied to be able to communicate positively and to be supportive? That classic ADHD piece of not wanting to let somebody down, not wanting to go into a conflict scenario, full of anxiety, giving the answer that they think is the right answer to be received, not the truth. And that is a whole hour in itself, if not more, isn't it? So how does the parent deal with that?
Well, so yeah, I have so many responses and some great resources. Ari Tuckman did a webinar for us on that we have available on the site on our events page. It's amazing, called The Truth About Lying. And he's going to be speaking about it in our summit this summer as well, in the Parenting ADHD Now summit. What you spoke to after you asked the question is the key, which is that when a kid is lying, if we can step out of the how can they speak to me that way, I can't believe it, if we can step out of our own worry about it and get curious, we always ask what's underneath, right? So there's the issue, what's underneath that, what's underneath that? What's causing the lie? Are they lying because they really meant to do it, they're sure they're going to do it, and they're telling you they turned it in because they really want to turn it in? Or are they lying because they're just tired of being wrong? Or are they lying because they don't trust you and they don't think you understand? Like, there's a reason behind it. The likelihood is that they're lying just to be manipulative is actually probably the lowest likelihood. There's something that's motivating their behavior. And if you can get curious about what's motivating their behavior and get curious about your role in the dynamic. One of the things Ari talks about is the ways in which we invite our kids to lie. We set them up to lie to us because we kind of back them against a wall where they kind of don't know what else to do. And we're not doing it intentionally, and I'm not blaming us for doing it. But understanding that lying is a really complex maze in this dynamic. And so to build trust often means building time with the relationship that has nothing to do with those issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, to some extent, trust that a teenager is going to lie to you sometimes anyway, because that's what teenagers do. And so that may or may not be related to all of these other issues. But when the relationship is strong, you can build from there.
Yeah. I was with the parents I was with this morning. I said, don't forget, and we must never forget, your child has a job description as a mid-teenager to be awkward, to be sulky, to go to their room and not come out and they effectively, at the age of 12, disappear to their bedroom, hibernate for 6 years, and then come out with hair everywhere that they didn't have when they went in. They have a job
And
description.
opinions.
And absolutely. And
Yeah.
if we try and disable ADHD and believe that we're disabling being a child or a youth, then we're on the wrong mission. And we have to have a latitude that allows a child or a young person to be that child and that young person. And life is not always smooth and easy running.
Not at all.
Now, we've got to close out now, sadly. As always, you're amazing to spend time with. There's a closing letter in your book, a closing letter to parents. You close out your latest book with a closing letter to parents, and I wondered if there was a closing statement for parents on the webinar tonight. What would be the voice of reason that you would use as your closing paragraph for this hour that we spent together?
You know, at the end of my podcast episodes, I always say, I thank parents for what they're doing for themselves and for their kids. Because if you're here, if you're listening, whether you're present now or listening to it later, you're engaging, you're making the effort, you're thinking and trying to be the parent your kid needs you to be. And so I think the closing letter is, give yourself credit for what you are doing. Right? Acknowledge yourself, focus on what you are doing. And know that what you're doing matters a lot. Being here, having these conversations, being in conversation with yourself about how do you want to be as a parent, which is what I think our coach approach is all about. That matters. It makes a difference for these kids. And if you can do one thing to shift everything for them, it's to model for them and teach them what it means to ask for help. Because if you can ask for help for yourself and get the help you need, because this stuff is not easy, then you begin to demystify that for them. And if we can help them learn to ask for and accept help, that is the greatest life skill you can teach them. So that's what I would close with is thank you for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids. It makes a huge difference.
Bless you. Now, where would any of the people accessing this webinar, where would they go to read more about your work? What's the website that would direct them to? What do we search on?
I think what we've got set up for your community is a special parent guide. If you go to impactparents.com/ADHD360, I know that's very innovative. But if you go to, I think it's impactparents.com/ADHD360, I'm double checking, that is correct. We've got a parent's guide to give you some resources and information, and from there that will connect you to impactparents.com or whatever other resources we have available. We have a training called Sanity School. We have group coaching, Sanity School Premium. And yes, there are plenty of people from the UK in our group coaching programs. We do them at all different times by all different ages. And there are just a lot of resources available to support you in this really delicate journey you're in as a parent, which is how do I take care of myself well enough to help my kid understand themselves well enough to learn to manage themselves. And that is as a parent of a 29, 27, and 23-year-old kids, I will tell you that is a lifelong journey. It's not ending when they turn 18. So that's another
absolutely
slow down moment, right? Take care of yourself, be in the journey with yourself, because you're in this for the long haul.
Well, thank you. Words of wisdom to finish. Oh, we've been trying to pull this together for a while, and we finally got there with busy diaries. But you struck a chord with me many years ago as being an expert in your field. You've reinforced it every time I've ever spent time with you. You've massively reinforced that tonight. It's been a privilege to interview you tonight. It genuinely is a heartfelt privilege to have spent this time with you. hopefully we'll see each other in at the Chad conference in November.
Absolutely.
I will give you a heads up now that it's on my birthday, so no excuses, Elaine. You need to make the most of that opportunity, and we will be in touch. We'll be in touch very soon. But thank you on behalf of the community for ADHD 360 that we've built over the years. And thank you ever so much for your time. I know your time is valuable, and this is the longest day of the year here in the UK. And I think on the longest day, we've had probably the best value webinar to see us into the evening. So thank you ever so much. Now we have the embarrassment of asking people to leave the webinar. Kristen doesn't like pressing the bump people off button. She feels that that's too much control, that's of a negative. But inevitably, if we start talking about what we've just done and debrief it, people hang on and listen to the debrief. It's hilarious. So we now have to look at each other and not talk to each other whilst people leave the webinar. But thank you everybody for joining.
Bye,
Great
everybody.
and thank you for your questions and your comments. Thank you.